This is going to be a video on veganism. I thought about making it a while ago, but now that I'm seeing this subject come back into the YouTube sphere, I'm reminded of that, so here goes. Can humans use some animals for food ethically? Now, the reasons for adopting a plant-based diet, such as for the environment and for your health, are all very sound reasons. Well, the health argument is really only relevant to health nuts. The rest of us who are perfectly willing to sacrifice a little health on the altar of hedonism have judged it to be worth sacrificing something that won't be missed when we're dead. However, when it comes to the suffering reduction argument, I don't think that works, especially not on a broader audience. But it's the one vegans always want you to address, so that's what I'll do here. I know this is an emotional subject for many people, even for some that aren't vegans, but all I want to do here is kind of make a case for at least the potential of using some animals for food in a way that remains ethical. First, I'd like to state that I'm an animal lover and I'm against animal abuse. So I'd also like to say that I believe a plant-based diet for all of us would be much better and is an important goal, if only just for the fact that it's much more sustainable and environmentally friendly. So, with that said, what is the nature of suffering? Well, the experience of suffering is a thought that lives only within an individual sentient mind, and varying levels or amounts of suffering can only be quantified within the mind experiencing it. It cannot exist external to the mind. So to say something like 100 people in a room suffering is more suffering than 10 is nonsensical. More individuals suffering only means more instances of suffering, not more suffering. Language limitations for describing what thoughts and experiences are make it difficult to express this properly, and I understand this is counterintuitive. If there are a few people here suffering and a few thousand people over there suffering, it seems logical to call the thousands of people suffering more suffering. But it's an illusion. It's a value judgment we assign to human suffering that informs us as to how strongly we should feel about it and which event will have a bigger impact to our society overall. Then we then anthropomorphize this value judgment. Millions of sentient creatures will suffer and die every day, and maybe there will be a few other animals around them that will notice, but the universe won't, and it changes nothing for them. Now, to me, this makes sense, but whether or not you accept this doesn't really matter. It's not germane to my reasoning here. I'm only bringing it up to lay a foundation to show how inconsistent we are when we're trying to assign levels of importance to varying amounts of suffering. Because if it is your position, then you're going to have to imply it consistently. You must include all sentient beings in that value assessment, as every being that comes into existence will suffer. Now, what separates us from other animals? Well, it isn't just intelligence. It's what we do with the potential that intelligence gives us. Humans develop an ability around the age of 4 that allows us to understand the relationship between ourselves, the teacher, and the subject, or the object in the world to be studied. It's called the teaching triangle, and there are several versions of this, but this one, the teacher is accepted as having the goal of helping the student, and not as a competitor driven by their own self-interest. No other animal besides humans can accept that another would act out of any other motivation than self-interest. The fact that we can gives us the ability to pass down knowledge. In this manner, a single human life can have a profound effect on all future generations. The only way other animals can affect future generations is to make future generations. Our understanding of our situation allows us to separate ourselves from our evolved nature. In fact, this is what the act of becoming a vegan is. No other animal could make the decision to change its diet over ethical concerns. We can break this cycle of consumption and reproduction and explore the possibilities of existence. We even have the potential of averting the next extinction level event and control not only our own destiny, but the fate of all other life on this planet. Now, that's the objective difference. But we have other subjective justifications for why we treat ourselves differently. Humans form society, and we create social contracts with each other, bound by a shared moral framework. We're all aware of our own mortality, and that understanding shapes how we cooperatively plan our lives and what rules to collectively follow. To assign value to your own life, you must be aware of yourself and your own mortality. Self-cognition and a rudimentary theory of mind has been seen in other species. However, that's still a long way from mortality salience. Humans must come up with ways to deal with the burden of understanding our finite nature. We have the shared goal of terror management. Other animals are spared the existential anxiety of this awareness. Let me give an example that illustrates the social contract. If I'm hiking in the mountains and I come across another hiker getting mauled by a mountain lion, I must do something. I don't have to offer myself up as an alternative meal, but I am required to at least find some help, and if I don't, it's a crime. Now, say I come across a deer being mauled by a mountain lion. Well, that's nature, and it's none of my concern. That animal is not part of our society, and therefore there are no ethical expectations of me to do anything. Now, how about if I come across a human attacking a deer? Well, they're committing the crime of animal abuse, and I must report it as they're part of my society. But then, what if he's naked and he looks like he was raised by wolves? Well, I still have to report it, but if it turns out he was raised by wolves, he hasn't committed a crime because he is not subject to our laws as he was never part of our society. However, that fact does not absolve the rest of us from treating him like any other human, because part of the social contract includes the fact that he was certainly related to someone who had been part of it, and they would have expectations. So there's no getting out of the human club. Now, anything that happens to an animal changes nothing for them. They do what they do, and that's all that they do, and they have no concept of this limitation. So there's nothing for them to miss. Every other species of animal on this planet has reached their apex. And there's some 8 million years and several speciation events between us and our closest relative, the chimpanzee. Taking all this into account, I think I've shown why any argument that asks, if we do it to animals, why not humans, is a false equivalency. Now, more proof of how selective we are when deciding when we think suffering accumulates is the pet industry. We have imposed existence on billions of pets that will suffer as much or more than most food animals. Food animals are not allowed to get old and decrepit. It's like that movie Logan's Run for them, only they'll never find out. How is it that only suffering without love accumulates? And how is it that pets are not just being used for our pleasure and unnecessarily suffering, just like food animals? And there are some vegans that agree with this, but they still can't help themselves from anthropomorphizing these pets. The last dog I had was with me for 17 years, and the last 4 years of her life, she had hip problems and couldn't get up by herself. So I made a sling and would help her up, and after a bit, she could walk on her own. But she couldn't squat to do her business, so she would often make a mess of herself, and I'd have to wipe her butt and give her a bath, and I'd put diapers on her at night. Now, she showed obvious signs of being in some pain, but she would still wag her tail and when I approached, anticipating the belly rub, so I kept her alive until finally she just died in her sleep. Now, many people think that's a nice story. I put so much effort into giving that dog a long, happy life, and then she passed away peacefully in her sleep. But is that a nice story? I mean, didn't I impose unnecessary suffering on her for just a few more years of existence for what could only be selfish reasons? Wasn't it anthropomorphic and selfish of me to think that she just wouldn't want to leave me? And did her life have value, even though if that value was just companionship for me? I had a vegan tell me once that even if meat eating was proven to add as much as 5 years to your life, it still would not make it ethical. Well, maybe so, but that's just saying we're all going to die anyway, so why do you think you have the right to steal time from other animals? It's an interesting position, but if you can't assign value to 5 more years of human life, how can you do it for animal life? I can't think of anything an animal might do of lasting value with 5 more years of life. But I can't think of many things a human might do. And what about the lives of wild animals? I mean, this horror show that is life on this planet has been going on for a few billion years and could continue for billions more. That liquid that fuels your car is testimony to all that past suffering. So when put into perspective, the suffering we're responsible for barely registers. Pretty much everyone, especially vegans, loves animal conservation and habitat preservation and such. And we're very happy when wild animal populations go up, and sad when they go down, and especially sad when a species goes extinct. And I am too, but I'm not deluded as to the selfish nature of this desire. Saving those cute owls is great, but where's the moral concern over the thousands of little furry bunnies and squirrels that just one owl will torture and eat in its life? And at least they're eating them. An outdoor cat will just torture and kill them, then give them out as presents. Everyone lost their shit when that Dennis killed Cecil the lion, ignoring the suffering that lion caused and would have caused. And I've seen a video of a pack of lions eating a baby elephant alive. I mean, that's a horror show, worse than anything I've seen in a slaughterhouse. And if you're going to start anthropomorphizing, can you imagine what it would be like to be a fish on a reef? You know, it would be like having Jason hunting you all day and Freddy Krueger hunting you all night for your entire existence. I mean, the sweet release that the numbing ice in my fish cooler offers would be a welcome end to an unimaginable nightmare. It seems many people, especially vegans, have a Disney film running in their mind of bunnies frolicking in the meadow that edit out the hawk swooping down and ripping it apart, and an animated lion being best buds with a zebra that once in a while must eat fish to avoid eating his friend. Repeat after me, Alex. Fish are friends, not food. And saying that the suffering that occurs in nature is just part of nature is a naturalistic fallacy, because we do have the ability to stop it, and it would be in our own extinction as well, but there's no objective case for humans existing either. The reality for food animals is the same for wild animals, but for some reason, if we allow animals to die from any of the methods that nature has in store, other than human predation, the more the merrier. We see any decline in wild animal populations as a problem that must be addressed, because the life of a wild animal is always worth living, regardless of how much suffering we know it will endure. So why do the lives of captive animals have no value unless they are loved like pets and allowed to live for as long as their biology enables? This would be counterintuitive if suffering were cumulative. No. And ethics has nothing to say about what we do with a dead animal, and the only reason it has anything to say about what we do with a dead human is because the wishes expressed by that human and the sensibility of those that knew them. And unless you're cremated, you're going to be food for something. So why do we eat some animals and not others? From a purely ethical standpoint, I totally agree. This is a little bit arbitrary and contradictory, but how we apply our moral judgments has always been a bit complicated. Predators are a keystone species, so messing with that natural balance can have very negative consequences to our environment. And they will require animal protein, and it would be far more efficient to just eat the meat you feed them. Cows eat grass, chickens eat grain, and pigs will eat pretty much anything, and they're all fine in confined, predation-free environments with all they can eat, and so are we, kind of. Domesticated animals like dogs were bred to serve us. We did sort of trick them into accepting us as part of their pack, but whatever the initial reason was, they have earned a special status above all other animals. It's quite possible we owe our very existence to the symbiotic relationship we have with dogs. They got us through a time when we were on the menu as well. Horses are the same way. They've carried us into battle and were invaluable partners on our journey to here. We owe so much of our progress to them. And I guess apes get a pass because they're so close to us on the phylogenetic tree. And in the West, sometimes animals that have demonstrated self-cognition, like dolphins and elephants, get a pass. And cuteness will sometimes get you a pass as well. But other than that, being on the endangered list is the only other pass we give out. And just because humans are assigning a purpose for food animals, and because we know something about their fate that they can never comprehend, that does not make their life sad to them. We constantly make these anthropomorphic value judgments. But for domesticated animals, if there's plenty of food, water, and company, they could care less what's on the other side of that fence. Freedom has no meaning for them, and they have no care or understanding for when and what method of death will come for them. So there's just as much value to their time here as wild animals or loved pets. We're all born addicted to life, and then we kind of create whatever purpose we can muster Life is consumption, reproduction, and need fulfillment at its core. Now, I'm not an antinatalist, however, if you're a vegan, that's saying unnecessary suffering is absolutely unnecessary. It would be to be logically consistent, you would not only have to be an antinatalist, you would have to be for the extermination of all life on this planet. And if you're not, then we've at least established that you're okay with at least some level of unnecessary suffering to perpetuate life. And if you believe that suffering is quantifiable, then the only difference between an antinatalist, a vegan, and a meat eater is their level of unnecessary suffering acceptance. At the top, you would have the zero harm tolerance antinatalist that believes so much as an uncomfortable moment is a harm that would not have existed if they had not come into existence in the first place. Many other antinatalists, however, they'll accept some level of harm as a price of admission. Vegans, whom are not antinatalists, have decided the level of harm they'll accept is any harm that they wouldn't have to sacrifice a major convenience to stop. Our modern existence, though, involves a long chain of unnecessary supplies, and maintaining that chain causes harm. However, as long as you ignore all harm other than what is caused by the meat industry, you can become a vegan without your modern life taking a hit. But giving up modern conveniences or not owning something cute to cuddle is too much to ask for most vegans. And the ones that it isn't should know that it would be an impossible sell to the rest of us. And then you have someone like me that believes that you can be ethical meat eater just by not abusing our livestock. So many vegans are like social justice warriors who refuse to acknowledge that people who disagree with them are not garbage humans. They've embraced the righteousness of their truth, and you must submit completely, and your half measures are dismissed as empty gestures. Vegan advocates have been at this for a while, and they've only managed to convert 2% of the U.S. population to veganism, and only 1 in 4 vegetarians are vegans. Maybe it's time for a more nuanced approach. You need allies. Taking a rigid position that you can't be an ethical person and eat meat is counterproductive if your goal is harm reduction and not just virtue signaling. The meat industry doesn't care about what vegans say about their industry. They're not their demographic. It's only the consumers that can affect change and force it to be a more responsible industry that we can then monitor and financially punish for cruelty violations. It's a much more realistic goal than an all-or-nothing approach of just stop eating meat, which is doomed to fail because, like all the attempts to engineer social behaviors, it ignores human nature. And it must turn authoritarian to have any measurable success. Telling meat eaters they're absolutely causing unacceptable harm and must stop or be judged evil, murderous monsters only serves to make them recoil and ignore you. And for the most part, the people that kind of emotional manipulation would work on, it already has. But if you can get enough people to spend a little more money on meat products produced through a more ethically responsible farming practices, that would end much more cruelty than the all-or-nothing approach. More expensive meat will also reduce the amounts we consume. And then we continue to work on a more sustainable way to feed the projected 9.5 billion of us by the year 2050. And if you don't think that's possible, then how do you think an abstinence-only approach is going to work? Like I said, it's only managed half of 1% so far. And I'm sorry if you don't think that's good enough, but if you really think every bit helps, then you must accept that incremental change is the only way we do things, when we have any choice at all, that is. All right, that's not it, but it's enough damage for today. Thanks for listening. Comments welcome. Cheers.